Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Noir Histoire. I'm Natasha, and in this episode, I'll be discussing Blood Diamond. Blood Diamond is a 2006 Edward Zwick-directed film set in war-torn 1990s Sierre Leone about a large and potentially life-changing diamond. As factions within the country fight over control of resources, the diamond industry exploits the turmoil by purchasing conflict diamonds. The precious stones have become especially coveted as they can be used to provide funding for purchasing weapons and other equipment. Solomon Vandy, played by Jimon Hunsu, a Mende fisherman, is separated from his family and forced to mine for diamonds after a group of rebels take control of his village. When he finds a large uncut diamond, it offers a potential path for reconnecting with his family. But the diamond also attracts the attention of a warlord, Captain Poison, played by David Harewood, white South African diamond smuggler Danny Archer, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, American journalist Maddie Bowen, played by Jennifer Connelly, and a host of others who all have their own plans for the diamond. Blood Diamond begins with a man, in Sierre Leone, with a man by the name of Solomon. He's a family man, wife, children. He's a fisherman in a small village and is encouraging his son to go to school, get an education, so hopefully he can become a doctor and have an easier life, a better life than Solomon does. In returning at the end of the day, him and his son meet up, and you can see they have a really nice relationship with each other. They play around, they joke and things like that. But as the two are walking along the way home, jeeps filled with rebels come racing into town. And with this, Solomon grabs his son and they take off running in search of safety for themselves first, but then also to go and try to protect the rest of the family. Because these individuals are riding in jeeps, they're able to move more quickly. Solomon and his son, they take the back way. They're running, they see the rebels are approaching the village, they get into the village, hop out of their vehicles, and immediately begin opening fire on the different people within the village, shooting men, women, children. Fortunately, Solomon is able to get back to his family's, for lack of a better term, I would say hut, right? And he's able to cut out a space for his wife to get out the back and escape with the children. So he was able to help his family, but unfortunately, in the midst of this, he's captured by the rebels. And we see just the brutality, right? Where they come into this village, they open fire, indiscriminately killing, and once things have settled down, they gather up the people that are still alive within the village, and we see them take this little boy, have him put his arms out over the bow. I think that's what you call it, right? The bottom of the boat. And they ask him this thing of long sleeves, short sleeves, where they either cut off his hand or cut off part of the arm. And so, Solomon, initially they're going to cut off his hand or arm, but the rebel leader sees him, recognizes that he's a big, strapping man, that he can work. And so he's saved from losing a part of his limb. With that, he's taken and forced to work in the local diamond mines where other people have been forced to work as well. There's this constant threat of violence. We see this in the village. We see this in the aftermath, that even in surviving the attack in the village, you could still end up losing your life or being harmed and disfigured in some way. Now, I don't know the details of the diamond conflict in Sierra Leone, but I do remember reading a book about the Congo and King Leopold, right? Where there were photos of, hands and stuff like that just stacked up. Apparently this was a thing, kind of escaping one brand of hell, a certain death, to be sent into the mines where there's still this constant threat of death and danger. They have them in what appears to be some sort of a body of water, panning for diamonds. You have another guy who's panning and whatnot. It seems he finds a diamond and tries to tuck it away in his mouth. The rebel leader happens to see this and commands him to spit it out. When he does, probably thinking, okay, if I just take this out of my mouth, that'll be the end of it. Instead, he takes it out of his mouth, and the rebel leader, I think his name is Commander Poison or something like that, just shoots him, killing him on the spot. Solomon is also panning for diamonds, right? And he finds a very large pink diamond. It looks like a dusty rock, right? But because it's unpolished and uncut, but it's a diamond. And he decides to try to squirrel it away. There's a little disturbance which creates a diversion, and it enables him to kind of duck down and hide it between his toes until he can get out of the water. But even with that, in getting past, one of the leaders, he tells him that he needs to use the bathroom. But as soon as he steps on the land, the rebel leader takes notice of him, searches him, grabs him up and stuff. Like, imagine, doesn't even just tell him to like open his mouth, takes his hand, grabs Solomon's face, tells him to open his mouth, and like puts his hands all in his mouth and whatnot, searching him, like patting him down. He has him stick out his hands. After doing this like thoroughly invasive search, he finally lets him go. At which point Solomon digs a little hole and tries to hide away the diamond. But there's another disturbance. The military at this point has now arrived. And so with that, you now have this fighting between the rebels and the military. And the rebel leader has actually doubled back and, sees Solomon. So Solomon actually has like these brushes with death, right? Having some act of danger or violence about to be committed upon him, and he ends up being saved, right? The rebel leader gets hit in the eye by, I think it's like shrapnel or something like that. There's guns going off, bombs being dropped. Something drops and injures his eye, allowing Solomon to get away. He's arrested, but he does have the opportunity to bury the diamond first, most likely in hopes of being able to return to that spot and retrieve the diamond. In the immediate moment, he's carted off to, it seems like some kind of jail, where everyone, including the rebel leader and the other rebels, are held. And so he's once again plunged into danger, right? In the midst of this, the rebel leader starts talking loudly about him having found this diamond, which would make him a target. Right? You have other prisoners in the jail cell. Fortunately, it seems like they have, at least for the time being, he's like in a large room, but in a separate cell from the other prisoners. And so you have the rebel leader like yelling out that he's found this really big diamond and stuff like that. The other prisoners are looking at him like he's looking like food. The rebel guy is like causing a ruckus. And so there's a diamond smuggler there. His name is Danny Archer. Who is now in prison for having attempted to smuggle diamonds out of the country. And at hearing this, his ears perk up. He's from what would have been Rhodesia, but by now is Zimbabwe, because getting it would certainly be a nice little windfall for him. So he uses his contacts to get himself out of prison, but also arranges for Solomon to be released, as he has plans of connecting with him, hopefully following him back to where the diamond was hidden, so he can get it and use it as part of his diamond trading. At the start of the film, I'm not sure if it's supposed to be like the UN or something like that, but there's this meeting taking place where initiatives are being discussed about how to stop the smuggling of diamonds. Noticeably, it's a room filled with white people. No black people in the room. And they seem to be largely like American, European, maybe with some of them being like a few white Africans. But for the most part, you don't see, or at least I didn't see or notice any black people in the room. Whenever there's some resource that's discovered, for lack of a better term, or some use is found for a resource from Africa, Africans tend to lose out. It's what happened with ivory. It's what happened with rubber. It's what happens with resources, natural resources. But in this case, now we're discussing diamonds. We're in the quest to obtain diamonds, to control the diamond trade, to control the diamond market, the mining and procurement of diamonds. You see the devastation that it's causing within these African nations, in this case, Sierre Leone, where basically it reminds me of the book Dancing in the Glory of Monsters, which was about the Congo, where diamonds are used as part of an illicit trade to help fund armies, rebel groups and stuff. And so you have these two sides selling diamonds to traders so they can procure weapons and whatnot and keep this war going. There's this conversation that takes place where Danny is speaking to someone. He's speaking to someone who sells arms to the rebel forces. And then the government in turn grants them contracts, basically giving them money to fight against the rebels. So it's like this guy is making money off of both ends. He's selling guns, weapons, other munitions and whatnot to one faction. And then the other faction is paying him and his people to fight this faction that he's sending weapons to. So it's like he's basically profiting from both ends of the war. Once released from holding, pretty much all of them are released, right? They were just held temporarily. Danny gets out first because of his connections, and he uses his connections to get Solomon out as well. The rebel leader is then released later on, and he pretty much becomes the bad guy of the film. Danny is a diamond smuggler, and so he wants Solomon to take him to where he's hidden the diamond. Solomon, meanwhile, He has a family. He has children. He's trying to reconnect with them. That's his goal. That's his aim. He's been taken and held for some time in the diamond mine, and he's now been held in jail. Fortunately, he escaped from the rebels, and with this, he wants to reunite with his family. Archer wants a diamond, right? It's rumored that it's described as pink. It's of good size, so it will be very valuable. And so he wants to get this diamond. Obtaining this diamond, if he sells it, he believes it would be his ticket off the continent, right? He'd be able to pretty much go wherever he wants. So basically what you have is that Solomon gets together with Danny, right? And he's like hanging out at a bar and meets this journalist who he begins talking to, right? He's not open to talking to her because if he reveals any information about diamond smuggling, it can mean the end of his career. And so he's from Zimbabwe. He's been in the military, served in the military. He has a very thorough understanding of how these different underground economies, as well as like war and things like that, work in the area. Mercenaries and all this kind of stuff. He has relationships with, I believe it's like the general who operates in the area. And he has ties to both sides, right? Like the mercenaries as well. He's left the military service. He's finished being a mercenary. Right now, he's mostly just focused on diamond smuggling, which is what he was arrested for. And so he uses his contacts to try to get this diamond, right? To reconnect with Solomon, who still has his family and things like that. He's looking to reconnect with them. At this point, some time has gone by and he's not really sure where to look for them. But with him meeting Danny and then later on Maddie, they are now potential resources. Danny offers the possibility of being able to help him find his family. Solomon, in exchange, could possibly help Danny find this very valuable diamond. And so with that, the two of them, I wouldn't say it's a friendship, but more so it's a mutually beneficial temporary partnership. But given the fighting going on in the area, the diamond mine is located quite some ways away from where they currently are. And so they'll have to move through hostile territory. And because of that, Danny needs to procure a little bit of help. The journalist has become a potential resource, right? She has contacts, she has ties to NGOs, and can get them information, helpful information, right, about Solomon's family. So for the moment, they form a trio. They begin moving through the country in efforts to pursue what each one of them is hoping to find. She's trying to get a story, right? And so with that, it offers an opportunity to see different perspectives of the conflict that's taken place within this country. And even within this, each one of the characters, they kind of represent a part of the conflict in Africa. You have Solomon, who kind of represents a lot of the regular citizens in these African countries, people who are just going about their day, trying to provide for themselves, to take care of their families, but they get drawn into these conflicts. In this case, being forced to work in diamond mines, which is something that, it's a reality for a lot of people, in these diamond mines. But in the past, it was part of the history of the harvesting of rubber. It might have been part of the history of the harvesting of ivory, where Danny Archer, he then represents some of the exploitative forces, the mercenaries and commercial interests, the people that benefit from these conflicts, that profit from these conflicts. In this case, he's been a soldier, he's been a mercenary, he's also been and is at present a diamond smuggler. So he represents the commercial side of this, the military side as well, to a degree. And so there's this faction of society that's willing to sacrifice and kill and whatnot in pursuit of obtaining these natural resources, of profiting from these natural resources. We see that he doesn't really have any connections or anything like that. It's explained that his family was killed years earlier. He was pretty much a boy left on his own and came into contact with this general guy, and through that became a soldier. And so it's greatly affected his outlook on life, how he moves through life. He doesn't really have any family or relationship connections. He's like just out here on his own in the world. At one point, Solomon kind of asked him, like, what are you going to do when you get this diamond? You're a man. You're not married. You don't have a family. When you get this diamond, what exactly are you planning to do with it? At that point, where you're likely going to get a good amount of money, you've made a good amount of money. Would you have enough to finally have a family, to settle down, to really make a home for yourself, to make a life for yourself? And it becomes clear that Danny's goal in accumulating wealth is just to accumulate wealth. He doesn't really have any long-term dreams that he's working towards. He's really just trying to get money to have money. Because at this point, it sounds like he's been smuggling diamonds for a while. And before that, he was a mercenary. So he should have money. But it's this thing of, like one of the other characters mentions, that he has this vision. If he gets this diamond, he'll finally be able to leave Africa. He'll be able to leave the continent. The reality is, by this point, if Danny really wanted to leave, if his thing was getting money to leave, by this point, it sounds like he probably should have the means to do so. But it's this thing of, he's really pursuing money. Unlike a lot of the other characters, he doesn't have any really grand overarching motivation that moves him through the story. His motivation is the diamond, and the diamond itself is really representative of money. The reality is that regardless of however much he gets, it's never going to be enough. He's always going to forever be in pursuit of more. Solomon, his goal, his motivation through the movie is to get back to his family. We have the journalist lady. Her motivation is kind of bringing awareness to what's going on, right? Like getting this story. And so you have this perspective, which she kind of represents, like journalists, NGOs, aid organizations, like the media and things like that, helping to bring attention to these conflicts, to kind of guide resources towards these conflicts, right? And hopefully make people aware of them. Maybe to drive donations or some kind of efforts to help, if not eradicate these problems, then to help alleviate them, to bring some kind of relief for the people struggling through them. And as a fourth main character, you have Solomon's son's Dia, who's a boy of about maybe like 10 or so, maybe a little bit older, a little bit younger. And so we found that he's become separated from his mother and siblings. He's actually drafted into the service of the rebels. He becomes a child soldier. In a sense, watching this movie, I know it came out years before, maybe like 10 or so years before, but it actually reminded me of the character Dia and the story Beasts of No Nations, which I recently reviewed, where you have like the story of a child soldier. We see him start out as being just a normal boy, him being pulled into the military, pulled into fighting, and sort of like that indoctrination process. Being out there, having to kill people, to murder, to shoot, drinking, carrying on, playing cards, this really dysfunctional behavior for an adult, made even more so dysfunctional because it's being taught to a child. And so the film shows these four different perspectives, or groups of people who like play different roles in these conflicts. And so with Dia, we see what he's going through in becoming a child soldier, right? And the thing that kind of ties it all together is the pursuit of this pink diamond. As the trio move through the country, trying to get back to the area, trying to get back to the diamond mines, it offers an opportunity to see what conflict is like. You know, when the rebels and soldiers are fighting in the street and you as a citizen are just minding your business, going about your errands or going to work or school or whatever it is, and the fighting suddenly comes along. And it's like without notice, your life can be in danger. You have to flee and run for cover, find some kind of shelter or safety or what have you. And so with that, it's actually a really great movie in the sense that around the time that it came out, you were having a lot of conversation about conflict diamonds. And I guess it's the case with anything that we as consumers purchase, right? Understanding where it's coming from. So even onto like the clothes that we buy, the clothes that we wear, understanding that some of the clothes are produced in sweatshops, right? Like they're produced in places where people work under unsafe or unfair work conditions, exploitative work conditions. And it's like, here we have it with diamonds, this thing we buy, and, through various machinations, the market is manipulated, right? How, just making people more aware of it, right? Just what it takes, and the not so nice aspects behind the things we purchase, right? Them becoming more well-informed customers. And so from that perspective, I thought it was a really great movie. Certainly the story is good, the acting is good, but this kind of basis in reality I thought was really interesting. The message behind it was interesting. In the years since, I haven't really heard much about conflict diamonds. Not to say it's no longer an issue. I don't know what, if any, true impact the film had on the subject. as far as people's awareness or how they deal with the purchase of diamonds. But aside from that, I think it's a pretty good movie, right? There's a conversation that we see between Solomon and Danny. We're separated from the journalist. Like, she has her own mission that she's gone off on to pursue. And it's like, we see along the way that there are people trying to do good, right? Representing different parts of society. We see what a refugee camp looks like, a representation of a refugee camp, as well as people who are on the ground trying to do work in rebuilding these communities, helping to foster relationships between these different groups. The people who are on the ground in the form of, I think it was like a teacher or something like that, but at least he was working for some kind of an aid organization. He's from the area, knows a lot of the rebels, but we see that even with him, like, he tried to do good work, having faith in the good of people, that he experiences violence. And there's just a lot, right? There's a lot to discuss here. There's a lot of commentary about what goes on in these kinds of war-torn environments when you have people fighting for resources. Something that I noted is that Danny, in a sense, he's like the anti-hero. He's not an upstanding citizen or anything along those lines, but we see that Solomon traveling, right? He has this kind of bossy way about him. Like, really, the two of them should be equals, and that they both have something that they want from the other. But Danny, being the selfish person that he is, there's this kind of ongoing question throughout the movie where it's like, sure, they have to safeguard against the other characters. In this case, the rebel leader, the general guy, right? They have to avoid contact with both the rebels and the army. But then it's like within themselves, Solomon has to worry about Danny double crossing him, like stealing the diamond, or them finding the diamond and him just running off with it. So there's this question throughout where it's like, when they find this diamond, what's really going to happen? The bargain or the expectation is that in exchange for Solomon helping Danny find the diamond, that Danny will help Solomon find his son and his family. We see that he's kind of not necessarily resistant, but his selfishness prevents him, his lack of relationships prevents him from really appreciating Solomon's quest to find his son. So it's like, you get the sense that he'd be willing to sacrifice, or he'd be willing to double cross Solomon to get this diamond. Over the course of the film, the way that he speaks to Solomon is condescending. It's indicative of the social structure within this environment, where you have Solomon as, for lack of a better term, he's an indigenous African, a person from Africa, right? And then you have Danny as pretty much, he's like the descendant of colonialists, right? Solomon's a regular person. Danny represents like the imperialist structure and capitalist interests, right? He doesn't treat Solomon as an equal. He speaks to him as though Solomon is his employee, like he works for him. And it's like, it's representative of the relationship between these two factions in this society, right? There's quite a bit to explore there. The film starts with this conflict about diamonds, this UN presentation about conflict diamonds, right? And them introducing a bill to safeguard against the export or trading in conflict diamonds. And you have this diamond interest, a few people who represent the diamond interests. And we see throughout the film where there's this messy representation of what's going on, what's taking place, where it's like, they are doing these really terrible things in Africa and to Africans to mine and gather these diamonds, but they kind of clean up things, the presentation of things, when they're back in Europe, when they're back in America. And so it's like the saying about hot dogs, right? Eating hot dogs versus watching them be made. Here it is that you have these beautiful stones, but there's this terribly ugly story behind how they're produced. And so at the film's end, we see Solomon, and he now has a diamond and uses it to kind of make a better life for himself, to safeguard the safety and the future of his children, where with the assistance of the journalist, right? But in exchange for that, she then gets this story about these conflict diamonds. And the reality is that she puts out this really nice story and whatnot. It looks like it's in a magazine. But aside from people reading this article, it's like, how much change is that really going to bring about? How much change is that? How effective is it going to be? How much of an effect is that article going to have, right? Pretty much you have the diamond interest where it's like, it seems like they don't say the name, but they're representative of De Beers. And there's this conversation about this thing where in reality, them taking diamonds, which are actually relatively plentiful, but through manipulation of supply and demand, they monopolize the industry. They control the production and release of diamonds, which then results in this false scarcity. And so you get some of that commentary here. You know, I found it very telling that at the end of the film, you see a guy from the diamond company. He pretty much takes the now obtained diamond and locks it away in a safety deposit box. It's one diamond. Sure, it's pretty big and whatnot, but he puts it in a safety deposit box that is then surrounded by other boxes, which we can assume also have diamonds in them. So there's all this conflict around this one diamond, only to realize when he gathers it up that it's surrounded by a bunch of other diamonds. So it's like you have all of this drama and whatnot over these stones, over these rocks, but there's so many of them. But because of these various machinations, all of this conflict and drama, the stones themselves, the industry has created all of this drama around the stones. And so I thought it was a really great film, very interesting film. I like movies like this that are good from like a story standpoint and that they're entertaining, but that they also offer some deeper commentary. And so in that regard, I thought when it came out, it was like a really popular movie, or rather a big deal was made about it. And I think this is one of those movies where it's rightly deserved, right? I highly recommend checking this film out. Video outro. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes are available on the Noir Histoire website by the link in the episode description. If you enjoyed this episode and want more movie recommendations, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist.